My name is Emma, and I am 32 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed in quiet, ordinary happiness, the kind that comes from routines, from small kindnesses, from the comfort of belonging to someone who promises to never leave your side. I thought I had found that in Michael, my husband. We had been married just 2 years, but together almost 5, and I thought I knew him better than anyone else in the world. I thought love gave me the right to believe I could see into his soul. It was supposed to be our dream trip, a delayed honeymoon we had put off until we were stable in our jobs, until life felt less fragile. Paris. The city I had pinned in my heart since I was a little girl, cutting pictures of the Eiffel Tower from magazines. Michael had surprised me with the tickets first class, no less, as an anniversary gift. I remember clutching the envelope in my hands, laughing and crying at once, because it felt like proof that we were building a life that wasn't just survival, but celebration. That morning at the airport, I was lighthearted. I wore a soft cream sweater and jeans comfortable for the long flight. Michael was dressed sharper as always, dark blazer, watch, gleaming shoes polished enough to reflect the fluorescent lights overhead. We had already checked in and were winding our way through security when I noticed his face pale. His hand trembled slightly as he handed over his passport, and I asked if he was okay. He leaned close, his voice low and uneven. "I don't feel well," he whispered. I froze. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like his body wasn't betraying him, so much as his mind was unraveling. Then it happened. The officer who had just scanned his passport looked up at me. I will never forget his eyes. They weren't just startled. They were terrified. He stared at Michael, then at me, and in a voice strained but certain, he said something that cracked the foundation of my world in an instant. "You can't be here with him. You're in danger." I laughed nervously, at first assuming it was some bizarre joke, or maybe a mistake in the system. But the officer's face hardened, his hand, resting near the walkie-talkie, clipped to his vest. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "step away from him. Now." The way people turned to look at us felt like a slow tidal wave. Michael tried to speak, his jaw tightening, but his lips barely moved. His eyes locked on mine, pleading, warning, begging me not to listen. My stomach dropped, my body going cold, like every instinct inside me was being torn in half. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. "He's my husband." The officer shook his head almost sorrowfully. "No, you don't know who he really is." I felt my knees weaken as 2 more officers approached. Michael straightened suddenly, his face draining of all color, and for the briefest moment I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not fear, not sickness. Something darker, heavier, like resignation. They pulled him aside, speaking into radios, and everything blurred into shouts. Footsteps, the clatter of suitcases abandoned in haste. I stood rooted in place, unable to move, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Michael turned his head toward me once more, and that look, it was not the look of a man trying to reassure his wife. It was the look of someone who knew a secret had finally clawed its way into the light. I don't remember how long I stood there, or how I ended up in a small, cold office tucked behind the chaos of security. All I remember is the officer across from me placing a file on the table. My name was written on it in bold black ink. My name. Not Michael's. Mine. "Mrs. Taylor," he began, his tone grave, "you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, for your own safety." And in that suffocating room, I learned that the man I thought was my husband was not who I believed. The details spilled out slowly like poison dripping into water, each revelation staining everything I thought I knew. Michael wasn't just hiding a secret. He was the secret. He had another identity, another life, another family, and the part that made my blood run cold. The reason the officer had looked at me with such horror was because that other life wasn't just tangled in lies and betrayal. It was drenched in crimes, in violence, in things I had only read about in headlines and whispered rumors. Somehow, I had been living beside a stranger, loving him, sleeping beside him, trusting him with every part of my vulnerable heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. But I just sat there numb, my body refusing to believe the words, even as my mind tried to string them into sense. And then the officer said something that broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. Emma, he married you under a false identity, and we have reason to believe you were never meant to survive this trip. The walls around me seemed to collapse, the air pulled from my lungs. I thought of the tickets to Paris, the romantic surprise, the man I had kissed goodbye that very morning as if the world was simple. And in that instant, I realized everything I had built my life on was gone, shattered, erased, burned to ash by a truth I hadn't seen coming. The room felt too small to hold the weight of what they were telling me. My hands trembled on the table and the edges of the file blurred through my tears. I wanted to stand up to leave, to run until my legs gave out, but I couldn't move. My whole body had gone rigid, like I'd been frozen in place by the truth. He wouldn't, I whispered, my voice breaking in the middle. You don't understand him. Michael he's not. The officer cut me off gently but firmly. Emma, the man you know as Michael Taylor is an alias. His real name is not something I can disclose to you yet, but I need you to understand he is connected to an international investigation. He is dangerous. And yes, there are indications he intended to harm you. The words carved themselves into me like glass. Harm me. My husband. The man who had tucked me into bed when I was sick, who had whispered about growing old together, who had kissed my forehead in the middle of the night just because he had been planning something unthinkable. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. How long have you known? Why didn't anyone warn me? The officer exchanged a look with the woman standing beside him, a silent conversation heavy with things they weren't ready to share. We've been watching him for months, he said finally. But the timing, the evidence, we couldn't make a move without compromising the case. We didn't expect him to act this soon. I pressed my hands against my face, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Images flashed in my mind, the anniversary gift of Paris tickets, the way he had insisted on packing my bags for me, the odd heaviness of his suitcase compared to mine. All of it snapped together like cruel puzzle pieces, and then something else surfaced in my memory. The night before our trip, Michael had stood by the window far longer than usual, staring out into the darkness. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smiled faintly and said, "Nothing, just thinking about how perfect life feels right now." At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now it replayed in my head with a sickening twist. The officers kept asking me questions about his routines, about the people he met, about whether he had ever left me alone with documents, with his computer, with his phone. My answers came out halting, broken, because the more I spoke, the more I realized I had overlooked. His late nights at work. The times he flinched when I mentioned certain places or names. The way he avoided introducing me to anyone from his past. At first, I had chalked it up to shyness, to a difficult childhood he never wanted to talk about. I thought he was just a private man who had finally chosen me to be the one person he let inside. Instead, he had built walls so high I never even saw the fortress I was trapped in. When they finally let me leave that room escorted by a female officer, the airport around us had transformed. People whispered in corners, flights were delayed, and the man I loved had been taken somewhere I couldn't follow. I wanted to see him, to demand an explanation, to grab him by the shoulders and scream, "Tell me this isn't true." But all I saw was the trail of his absence, his carry-on bag left behind his blazer draped carelessly over the chair, as if he had simply stepped out of his own life. They told me to go home, that someone would contact me soon. But home was no longer a safe place. Every corner of our apartment now looked like a lie. The photographs of us smiling on the beach, the notes he left on the fridge in his looping handwriting, the sweater of his that still smelled faintly of his cologne hanging in our bedroom. I walked through the rooms in a daze, touching things like they might burn me. That night, I lay awake on the couch staring at the ceiling. My chest ached, not just with betrayal, but with humiliation. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen the cracks in his story? And the worst part was the lingering question I couldn't escape: had any of it been real? Did he ever love me? Or was I just another pawn in whatever dark game he was playing? The days that followed blurred into a haze of interrogations, endless calls from investigators, and the quiet collapse of my own sanity. Reporters camped outside my building shouting questions I didn't have answers to. Headlines appeared online with words like double-life criminal mastermind and mystery wife. They wrote about me like I was a footnote to his story, like my pain was entertainment for strangers to consume. But the worst part wasn't the public spectacle. It was the phone call I received 3 nights later. A voice low and distorted came through the line. "Emma," it said, "he isn't who they say he is. But you need to be careful. They'll twist everything. Don't trust anyone." And then the line went dead. I sat frozen, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The caller had known my name, my number. And the cadence of that voice distorted, though it was sent chills down my spine. Because even through the static, I would have sworn it was him. "Michael, I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the floor, the phone clutched in my lap, staring at the shadows crawling along the walls. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every car door slamming outside felt like a warning. My heart wouldn't settle, and I kept hearing his voice echoing in my mind, distorted but unmistakable. Michael, my husband, my stranger. The next morning, 2 federal agents arrived at my apartment. They flashed badges, their expressions grim, as though I were some fragile piece of evidence they weren't sure how to handle. They asked me if anyone had contacted me, if I had heard from him. I lied. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the foolish part of me that still wanted to protect him even after everything. "No," I said, my voice flat. "I haven't heard anything." They studied me for a long moment, their eyes sharp. But eventually, they left with a warning. "If he tries to reach you, Emma, you need to tell us immediately. For your own safety." As soon as the door shut behind them, I doubled over, clutching my stomach, the weight of my own lie pressing down on me. Why had I done that? Why couldn't I just let them take this burden from me? But deep down, I knew the answer. Because despite everything, a part of me still needed to hear the truth from him. Not from files, not from agents, not from headlines. From Michael. 2 days later, another letter arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope in handwriting I knew as intimately as my own. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Emma, you don't know everything. They won't tell you the whole story. Meet me where we first kissed. Midnight. Alone, Mem." I read it over and over until the words blurred. My first instinct was to burn it, to call the agents, to scream until someone else carried the responsibility. But my heart betrayed me. The place he meant was the overlook by the lake, where we had shared our first kiss 5 years ago under a canopy of stars. A place so sacred in my memory, it still hurt to breathe when I thought of it. That night, I drove there. Every rational voice in my head told me not to, that it was reckless, maybe even suicidal. But I needed answers. I needed to know if any part of the man I loved was real. The air was cool, the lake still and glassy, reflecting the moon like a silent witness. I parked my car a distance away and walked slowly toward the overlook, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it echoed through the trees. And then I saw him. Michael. He stepped out of the shadows, thinner than I remembered, his eyes hollow but burning with some desperate intensity. He looked like a ghost, but he was real, standing there in the flesh. My breath caught in my throat, tears springing to my eyes without my permission. "Emma," he said softly, and even just hearing my name in his voice cracked something inside me. I wanted to run into his arms and slap him across the face all at once. Instead, I stood rooted in place, my voice sharp and broken. "Why? Why did you lie to me? Who the hell are you?" He swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. I am your husband. I meant every word I said to you, every moment we shared. But there are things I can't erase. My past caught up with me, and I was trying to keep you out of it. Paris wasn't. He paused, his jaw tightening. It wasn't supposed to end like that. My knees threatened to give way, but I forced myself to stay upright. They told me you planned to kill me. His eyes widened, pain flickering across his face. No. God, no. Emma, you have to believe me. I would never hurt you. But they're not wrong about me being dangerous. I've done things, unforgivable things. I wanted to run from it all to start over with you, but I was naive to think the past would just let me go. I shook my head violently, tears streaking my cheeks. You let me marry a lie. You made me love a lie. Michael stepped closer, his voice trembling. The love was never a lie. That's the only real thing I've ever had, I swear to you. The silence between us was thick with ghosts, with years of memories now twisted into something I couldn't recognize. And then headlights swept across the trees. My stomach lurched. Agents. They had followed me. Michael's face changed in an instant, the desperation hardening into resolve. He grabbed my hand, pressing something into my palm, a small flash drive. Emma, this has everything. The truth. About me, about them, about why they're after me. Don't trust anyone until you've seen it. Please. Before I could respond, voices shouted orders cracked through the night. Michael stepped back, raising his hands as agents swarmed. They tackled him to the ground, their guns trained on him, their shouts filling the air. And all I could do was stand there, clutching the flash drive, my heart breaking into pieces too sharp to ever fit back together. As they dragged him away, he looked up at me one last time, not with fear, not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it felt like it reached inside me and tore me apart. And then he was gone. The days after Michael was taken felt like drifting through a fog that never lifted. Reporters swarmed my building again, shoving microphones in my face, hurling questions I couldn't answer. Did you know about his crimes? Were you involved? Do you still love him? Every word felt like a dagger, cutting me open in front of strangers who wanted only a spectacle. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped opening the blinds. The only thing I couldn't stop doing was staring at the tiny flash drive he had pressed into my hand that night. I kept it hidden inside my jewelry box, tucked beneath a pair of earrings as though it were some cursed artifact that might burn me if I touched it too long. But it called to me. Every night I would take it out, hold it between my fingers, and wonder, was this the key to the truth, or just another layer of his lies? Finally, one sleepless night, I plugged it into my laptop. My breath caught as the screen lit up with folders, each one labeled in a neat, precise hand. Names, dates, locations, and within them files that made my blood run cold. Bank statements with amounts I couldn't fathom. Passports with different identities, all bearing Michael's face with subtle changes. Different hair glasses, facial hair, but always him. And then the photographs. Images of men I didn't recognize, some circled in red, some with notes scribbled beside them. A few of those men were high-profile figures I'd seen on the news. Some were dead. But the most shocking file was a video. My hand shook as I clicked it open. The screen flickered and then Michael's face appeared. Not the warm, loving face I knew from our mornings together, but the face of a man staring straight into the abyss. Emma, he began, his voice raw. If you're watching this, it means everything has fallen apart. You've probably been told I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But not in the way they'll make you believe. I worked for them. For years. The government. Intelligence operations missions they'll never admit to. I did things for them. Things I can never undo. And when I wanted out, when I met you, and realized I couldn't keep living that life, they turned me into the enemy. They couldn't risk me walking away. So they built this story, made me into a ghost, a criminal. And now I know they'll destroy me. He paused, his eyes dark, haunted. But you, Emma, you were the only real thing I ever had. I didn't marry you to use you. I married you because you saved me. I know that sounds twisted, but you gave me something I didn't think I deserved: love. If you hate me now, I understand. But please don't believe everything they tell you. Don't let them erase me." The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the black screen. My chest ached, my mind spinning. He claimed he wasn't a criminal, but a scapegoat. But how could I know? Was this his truth? Or just another manipulation? I sat there for hours, replaying his words, watching the video again and again until dawn crept through the blinds. My heart wanted to believe him. My mind screamed at me not to. The agents came back later that week, pressing me again for information. This time, I told them I had received the letter. I left out the flash drive. I couldn't explain why, I just couldn't hand it over. A part of me felt like it belonged to me, like it was the only proof that my life with him hadn't been entirely fiction. But keeping it came at a cost. My paranoia grew. I began to notice cars parked too long outside my building. Anonymous emails slipped into my inbox. Once I came home to find my front door ajar, though nothing was missing. My hand shook as I locked it behind me, my heart racing. And then one evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You've seen the files. Now you know he's not lying. They'll come for you too. Be ready." I dropped the phone, my body trembling uncontrollably. My mind screamed questions I couldn't answer. Who was texting me? Was it Michael? Was it one of his allies? Or was it someone watching me, pushing me deeper into this nightmare? The one thing I knew for certain was that nothing in my life would ever be the same. The woman who boarded that plane to Paris with her husband no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, more suspicious, and infinitely lonelier. But beneath the fear, one truth began to burn quietly inside me. I needed answers. Real ones. Not from the agents, not from the headlines, not even from Michael's haunting video. I had to find them myself. Because if I didn't, I would never know whether the man I loved was my protector or my predator. I started with the files on the flash drive, combing through them night after night like a woman possessed. I barely ate, barely slept. My entire world shrank down to the glow of my laptop screen and the fragments of Michael's hidden life that I tried to piece together. There were bank accounts spread across countries I'd never even visited. Money shuffled back and forth through shell companies with names that sounded like they belonged in spy novels. There were communications, encrypted emails, some already decrypted, others a tangle of code I couldn't understand. But the most chilling pieces were the surveillance photos, grainy shots of people walking down streets, boarding trains, entering buildings. Every one of them was cataloged meticulously with timestamps and notes. And then, buried deep in one of the folders, I found something that made me go cold all over. A picture of me, taken from across the street weeks before Michael and I had even met. My hair was longer than my smile, unguarded as I walked out of a coffee shop, clutching a cup in both hands. Written beneath in neat black letters, "Target approached." I pushed the laptop away, my stomach twisting violently. Had he been assigned to me? Was our love nothing more than a mission, a job I couldn't breathe? The weight of it crushed me, all the air sucked out of the room. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The next day, I confronted one of the agents who had been hounding me since his arrest, a woman named Carter, early 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that filled a room. I asked her outright, was I just a target? Did he choose me? Or was I chosen for him? She didn't flinch. She just looked at me with something almost like pity. "Emma, he's been trained to make people trust him. That's what he does. Whether it started as a job or not, I can't say. But don't fool yourself into thinking you were exempt from his lies." I wanted to hit her. I wanted to claw the smug certainty off her face. But deep down, I knew she was right about one thing: Michael had been trained to deceive, and I had been the perfect fool. Still, that picture of me haunted me. Why label me a target if I was just an ordinary woman he happened to meet unless the story ran deeper than either side was willing to admit? That night, I watched his video again, and for the first time, I listened not just to the words, but to the pauses, the places where his voice cracked, where his gaze faltered. "You gave me something I didn't think I deserved," he had said. That didn't sound like a man faking it. That sounded like a confession. But even if he had loved me, it didn't erase the fact that my life had been built on manipulation. That realization burned in my chest equal parts grief and rage. And rage has a way of sharpening everything. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to be the passive victim anymore, the woman everyone pitied in whispers on the evening news. I was going to find out the truth even if it broke me. I reached out to a journalist I trusted, someone I had known from college, who had built her career digging into government corruption. Her name was Lila, and when I told her I had information about Michael, about the case against him, her silence over the phone was deafening. Then she whispered, "Emma, do you realize what you're saying? They'll come after you." "They already have," I said. "So I need someone who isn't afraid to look deeper." Meeting with her was like stepping into a different world. We sat in a dingy cafe speaking in low voices while my hands shook around my coffee cup. I handed her a copy of the flash drive, telling her what little I knew. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the files. "This isn't just about your husband. This implicates people in power. Politicians, contractors, agencies. Emma, if this is real, it's explosive." Real. That word gnawed at me, because that was the question that ate me alive every day. What was real? My marriage, his love, his crimes. In the weeks that followed, Lila dug deep, and the more she uncovered, the more my world tilted. Because some of Michael's claims began to hold weight. Records that were supposed to exist had been erased. Names tied to covert operations suddenly went dark. And quietly, she told me something that made my blood run cold. "Emma, if this is true, Michael wasn't running from the law. He was running from them. And maybe you were never his target. You were his shield." Her words left me shaking. If she was right, it meant that everything, our love, our marriage, the life we built, was twisted, yes, but not entirely false. He might have lied about who he was, but maybe not about what we had. But just as that fragile hope began to flicker in me, I received another message, this time slipped under my apartment door in an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single sentence typed neatly on plain white paper. "You think you're uncovering the truth, but you're just writing your own obituary." My hands went numb, the paper slipping through my fingers. I stared at it on the floor, my heart pounding in my ears. Someone was watching me. Someone knew exactly what I was doing. And suddenly, I understood I wasn't just unraveling Michael's secrets anymore. I was entangled in them. And the deeper I went, the closer I came to inheriting his fate. I couldn't unsee that note on my floor. I picked it up with trembling hands, the words searing into me. "You're just writing your own obituary." It was a threat, yes, but also a grim kind of prophecy. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about Michael anymore. The danger he had lived in was now mine too. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to check in, but whose voices carried the thinly veiled curiosity of people hungry for gossip. My world narrowed down to survival. Locking doors, watching shadows, checking behind me on empty streets. I wasn't Emma the wife anymore. I was Emma the hunted. But even through the fear, I refused to let go of my need for answers. Lila kept digging, and each time we met, her face grew more serious. She had uncovered trails of money leading to names no one wanted to see, exposed senators, military contractors, people with enough power to bury anyone who stood in their way. And suddenly Michael's story didn't seem like the ramblings of a desperate liar. One night, Lila showed me a file she had cross-referenced. It contained orders for an operation that was never supposed to exist. Codename Black Veil. The list of operatives included Michael's real name, and at the very bottom, in smaller print, was a single chilling line: asset contact assigned for cover, Emma K. My throat closed. "That's me," I whispered. Lila looked at me with sorrow in her eyes. "Yes. It means you weren't random. You were chosen. But Emma, if you were assigned, then why would he risk exposing it all for you? That's the question you need to ask." That night, alone in my apartment, I watched his video again. For the 100th time. And this time, I didn't see the lies first. I saw the man whose hand shook when he held mine the day he proposed. The man who stayed up all night cooking soup when I had the flu. The man who whispered in the dark, "I don't deserve you, but I'll spend my life trying." Maybe it began as a mission. Maybe I was just a name on a file. But somewhere along the way it changed. He changed. And maybe in his own broken way he had truly loved me. The next morning, I woke to news alerts blasting across every channel. Michael had died in custody. The official story said he took his own life. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Men like Michael didn't just give up. Men like him were silenced. I dropped to my knees on the living room floor, clutching the TV remote to my chest, sobs tearing out of me until I couldn't breathe. He was gone. Whatever truth he still carried, whatever redemption he might have sought, it died with him. And all I was left with were fragments, unanswered questions, and the hollow echo of love turned into ash. For days, I didn't move from my apartment. I barely ate. I let the calls go unanswered, the reporters knock until they gave up. Grief and rage and betrayal churned inside me, a storm with no end. But eventually something shifted. I looked again at the flash drive, at the files that had nearly broken me. And I realized if I did nothing, then Michael's death was for nothing. If I stayed silent, then the people who used him, who used me, would keep on burying their sins in the shadows. So I made a choice. I gave everything to Lila. Every file, every photograph, every detail I could remember. She promised to protect me, though we both knew there was no real protection once powerful men decided you were disposable. When the first article went live, the world erupted. Cover-ups, corruption, names people once trusted tied to scandals they couldn't deny. And in the middle of it all, one truth became undeniable. Michael had not been the only one living in lies. The very system he once served was built on them. People asked me if it felt like victory exposing the truth. If revenge on those who ruined my life and killed my husband gave me peace. But the truth is, it didn't. It wasn't victory. It wasn't peace. It was survival. A survival scarred by grief, by betrayal, by the knowledge that the man I loved had been both my greatest joy and my greatest wound. Even now, years later, I sit by the window, sometimes staring out at the city lights, wondering if Michael's final words were real. "You were the only real thing I ever had." I want to believe him. God help me, I do. Because if that love was real, then maybe I wasn't just a pawn. Maybe I was the one thing in his life he didn't fake. What I learned in all of this is that betrayal doesn't always come from the villains we expect. Sometimes it comes from the people we trust the most. And sometimes love and lies live so closely together that when they're torn apart, the wound never truly heals. But I also learned this: no matter how broken you feel, no matter how deeply you've been deceived, you can still choose what to do with the truth. You can bury it, or you can set it free. And setting it free, though it cost me everything, is the only reason I can look at myself in the mirror now. If my story has reached you, if you've listened to the pieces of my life unravel, then I ask only this: hold on to your truth. Don't let anyone steal it from you. And if you've ever loved someone who broke you, know that your pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you think, please share it with others. Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, especially when stories like mine feel too heavy to carry alone.